What's up, Internet? You're tuning in to episode 108 of Nintendo Noise, Flipscreen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co hosts, Mr. Steven Radford
Hello, hello.
and Miss Sierra Plus Ultra.
Hi.
All right, so Sierra, you got away with it last week, right? We had to have you back on this week because it's new Nintendo hardware talk, baby. Let's go.
There is no escaping
No, this is your lot in life until the next console comes out. And then, of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
maybe a
Most
year into that life cycle, then we'll be talking about the Switch 3.
A
right,
year? You think a
exactly.
year?
A year from now?
No, you think it's gonna be a year in before people start talking about the next one? People start talking about
Uh,
the next one as soon as that thing drops.
no, you're right, but I mean, I think we got a little bit of time. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe you're
Can
right.
you I can't even imagine what the 2's gonna be like. We're gonna get a 3? That's crazy.
Yeah, it's almost time. It's almost time to start speculating about the Nintendo Switch 3. But today we're gonna keep it to Nintendo Switch 2 because we've got a ton of news like we talked about last week that came out. There's some updates to that story. I'm excited to jump into all that. But before we get into any of that, we got some drama to report on because of course you can't make it a month or two on this here show without having to talk a little bit about the FTC and Xbox's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Because of course we got some more juicy goss has leaked and a ton more of Xbox stuff that we won't even talk about today. But for our purposes, we have one email from back in 2020 that has been making the rounds today about Phil Spencer and some of the other leadership at Microsoft talking about acquiring Nintendo. And of course, we knew this. We know that that was the thing they've talked about. We know that they made an offer at one point and they were laughed out of the room. We know that this is a
That was a
thing
long time
a
ago,
long time
a
ago.
long
Right.
time ago. That was original Xbox era that you're talking about there with,
Uh-huh.
late 90s, early 2000s.
Point
This
being,
this
they've had their eye on Nintendo for quite some time.
Yeah, but, this email is just before they announced the acquisition of Bethesda. And it seems like they had just introduced Bethesda and the ZeniMax team to the Microsoft board of directors, and that discussion was ongoing. And it's also around the time when I think it was Trump was trying to break up TikTok
Correct.
and force the US arm to be sold off. Microsoft was looking at buying them, as was Walmart, and I think some other companies. It was a very strange situation.
That Walmart
And so,
one fucks me up to this day. It was like
yeah, it's really weird.
weird, really weird. I guess that's how they've stayed relevant, though, right? Is diversifying, but Jesus.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I, it's like it's kind of a nothing story at this point, right? We know that this isn't how it went down. We know that that's not what's going to happen right now. But it is so interesting to get to read these emails and see the inner workings. And there's
Yeah,
just
oh
like
yeah, we absolutely should never have been able to see these emails. It's
no,
all been taken down now. Like, it turns out that Microsoft uploaded these themselves by
yeah,
mistake, and they shouldn't
quote,
have.
quote unquote taken down. They're on the internet forever now, though, right?
Yeah, oh
Like
yeah, they're on the internet forever.
Yep.
once you
I don't
leak it,
know. I don't know that this is a nothing story though. It's like some of the comments that I know you're going to read out from Phil makes me think that this is their goal to eventually buy
yeah,
Nintendo, and they're just playing a very long game, and they've wanted them for a very long time. Like, the fact that he starts the email with saying, "I totally agree that Nintendo is the prime asset for us in gaming." And, like, he's not right. He's not wrong, right? Like, they would be an incredible coup to get,
yeah.
especially considering we've discussed, like, the possibility of them buying Sega so that they can get more family-friendly games. You buy Nintendo, you get Mario and everything that goes with it, and you dominate the handheld space in one fell
Jesus, though,
swoop.
Yeah, you get
can
Mario and Pikachu.
yeah, Jesus. Like I can't even imagine that happening at this point though, right? Like they were there's been all this hand wringing about them acquiring Activision Blizzard. Imagine them trying to buy one of the only other console manufacturers. I just don't see that
Oh,
happening.
absolutely not.
Like even if they want to,
Yeah.
like I don't think they could get away with it.
Microsoft
Definitely
Super
not
Mario
now.
World now opening in Orlando, Florida.
I mean, think about that seriously, right? Can you imagine? Like, there's no universe PlayStation can continue to compete if they own all of the Nintendo IP.
Yeah.
Right? Like their library becomes out of this world at that point
Oh
between
yeah, even the history, right, all the way from the NES. all they got to do is be like every single
Every
Nintendo game's now
Nintendo
available part of
published
their
game is on
yeah.
Game Pass.
It's now in the Xbox backwards
Oh
compatibility
my
library. You can play GameCube games on your Xbox.
Yeah.
ugh,
Can you
some
imagine?
gamers would want that. I don't.
Oh, I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like it would like for a segment of consumers, it would be an insane value, but like Jesus, that would be bleak for the future of the industry to have like literally the oldest pillar of hardware development just disappear because Microsoft
Yeah.
bought them out. That would be rough.
Yeah, this scenario is like a political alignment chart. It's really
You're right. It's like, would you be excited about this? Please tell on yourself and where you sit on the political spectrum.
I wonder who objects to it though, because I don't know that.
Nintendo.
Yeah, Nintendo obviously objects to it, and they
principle.
spoke about the possibility of a hostile takeover, right, in the email. But
Yeah, so here, let
which
me
government
I
which
missed
government objects
that.
to it?
let me
Well, I
read.
did not miss capital G gaming. Like,
Yeah,
gaming.
let me read a little bit from. It is funny how every time he says gaming, it is capitalized. That's actually really funny. I didn't realize that before right now. So he's talking about basically why it doesn't make sense, right? And he says, "I've had numerous conversations with the LT leadership team of Nintendo about about tighter collaboration, and feel like if any U.S. company would have a chance with Nintendo, we are probably in the best position. The unfortunate, or fortunate for Nintendo, situation is that Nintendo is sitting on a big pile of cash. They have a board of directors that until recently has not pushed for further increases in market growth or stock appreciation. I say until recently, as our former Microsoft board of director member, Value Act has been heavily acquiring shares of Nintendo, and I've kept in touch with Mason Morfitt as he's been acquiring." So then they talk a little bit about like as they buy more stock, that could create opportunities for us. And he says, without that catalyst, I don't see an angle to a near term mutually agreeable merger of Nintendo and Microsoft. And I don't think a hostile action would be a good move. So we are playing the long game. Right. And to take that back, I don't think a hostile takeover would be viable. I think like given all of the like heat on them right now, them aggressively trying to acquire, one of the only legitimate competitors they have in the market is like, I
What did you see
can't
the
see
other
that
email
happening.
from Phil where he said that they don't see them as a console manufacturer and they don't see the Switch as a console. It's a handheld gaming device.
Yeah, but they're wrong.
So I think that would be their argument in court.
Sure.
But it's who objects to it. Does the US government object to a
Yeah.
US company buying a foreign Japanese company? Do they care about that?
I don't think
Do
it's
they
about
do
it. I
they
don't think
care
it's
about a
about
US company getting bigger, or does another country like Japan object to it?
I mean, I think Japan would object to it, but I don't think it has to do with them being a foreign country. I think it has to do with Nintendo of America being one of the, biggest publishers of video games in this country, right? Like, I think regardless, like, if you want to argue that the Switch and the Xbox are like not analogous devices, like, I think that's fine. Like, you can argue that the handheld market is different than the home market, but the idea that they're not competitors and that like one of them no longer producing consoles and no longer producing exclusive software for their own hardware and instead making exclusive software for now one of the two remaining competitors in the market, there's no argument there that that doesn't diminish competition, that doesn't potentially harm the future of the industry, that it's not problematic for consumers, that it doesn't reduce consumer choice. Like, I don't see how you make a single argument that that's the case, right? Whereas, like, we've talked till the cows came home about why, as much as I don't like it, I don't think the Activision Blizzard thing is like damaging to competition in the industry like on its face, right? Like it's not like
It's not damaging to consumers, it's damaging to Microsoft's competition, which was
right.
the argument that I think the judge came back with. It's clear it's damaging to Sony, but it's not
Sure,
damaging
but
to
you
the
got to draw the
consumer.
line somewhere, right? Because it's like at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you can't limit companies from doing things that are damaging to the competitors. That's what a free market is, right? Like Xbox is making every effort they can to claw themselves from third place, right? And like they have to take swings at Sony to do that, and like you can argue that. Whereas like just straight up acquiring, the number one or number two, depending on which metrics you're looking at, player in the space is totally that is like the definition of consolidation, right?
hmm Yeah, I mean, this is crazy, right? Because in this email they talk about acquiring ZeniMax or Bethesda, which we know they did, and the board of directors approved that deal. But Phil also got pre-approval to buy Nintendo and Warner Brothers.
And Valve.
Warner and potentially Valve. Like Valve is in brackets, like comes up as a possibility. I can't see that Gabe sells to Microsoft. Maybe he does. Maybe that's his retirement
It
plan.
does say though with Valve, like Valve's in a parenthetical, but it says the board of directors has seen the full write up on Nintendo and Valve, and they're fully supportive of either if the opportunity arises.
Yeah.
As am I. And then they straight up, like you said, they straight up said they're like, we'll buy all three of them if it pans out.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah, they're fine doing
Nuts.
all three of these deals if they make sense.
Crazy.
I won't say Warner Brothers or Zenny is Nintendo, but both are for sale and gettable by us if things align.
Crazy. And like the WB thing's funny because he's going on about how it's like there's not really that much value there because you don't own the IP, you just get the studios, and it's like
Yeah, he even spoke. There was another document that came out where they like basically decided against Warner Brothers because of the negative press around crunch and them not wanting to push the teams too hard, so that they wouldn't be able to like they didn't want to buy it because of the negative press around crunch, basically.
well, and it's like, what do you do with them? Like these are all studios that are like the thing that they're most valuable for doing is working on IP that has weight, right? Like
Yeah, the
I don't
Lego games, like
yeah.
does
Or like
anyone
the
care?
Batman games, or like now that
Yeah.
you know the Turf Wizard game, right? It's like that game sold because of the IP. Those games sell because people fuck with Batman or they like Lego, right? Like it's not and no shade at these teams, right? Like Rocksteady makes great games or whatever, but like you
The
know,
value is the IP, that's why you're
Right.
buying Nintendo. You're buying Nintendo because you want Mario.
right. So I do just want to we'll put a pin in this and move on. But the way that Phil ended the email, I thought was funny. He goes, "I love this discussion and value you looking at the opportunities here. At some point, getting Nintendo would be a career moment, and I honestly believe a good move for both companies. It's just taking a long time for Nintendo to see their future exists off of their own hardware. A long time." Smiley face. And like,
I know a lot of people are not happy about that. Come on.
no, and like,
No.
I'll say I take that with a bit of a grain of salt because I'm thinking this is an internal email and like I'm reading this and it sounds like he got an email from another person at Microsoft that doesn't totally get gaming and is like, why don't we just buy Nintendo? And he's like, I love your energy. I love this idea. It makes absolutely no sense, but yeah, totally, man. Totally. Like,
Well, yeah, like the
you know
email
what I mean?
is
It has a
the
little of that
subject.
energy to it.
The
Yeah.
subject is random thought, and I cannot imagine working somewhere where a random thought is, "Shall we buy one of the biggest companies
And that's
in
what I'm
gaming?"
saying, right? Like his response to me feels like he's trying to be respectful to someone who's like, yeah, bro, of course I fucking thought about buying Nintendo. If that was an option, we would have done it, you know?
hmm Yeah, I
But
get that. I mean, you see you see kind of a little bit of what he's replying to with the TikTok stuff, right? I just love they chat so much in emails, and maybe it's because Microsoft makes Outlook and they're just like, oh, we've got to use this product. I don't know any other company
where's the
where they're
Teams
just
chat?
it's like the Teams chat was when they were talking about the PlayStation browser, but like it's just bizarre to me how chatty they are in emails. I want to send like one word answers back, but these people are writing books in their
Can
emails.
I be an executive at Microsoft and just like email Phil and be like, what if we bought Sega? Is that we
Random
think
thought.
about that? Can I get that
He's
job?
gonna suggest buying random things because
I'm like,
like
I'm just thinking out loud here, Phil. What if we just buy PlayStation? We own both consoles. Can we do that? That we thought about that one? We got the market cap, surely. All right, so let me ask you too, before we move on to talk about the Nintendo Switch 2, do you think Nintendo hasn't realized that the future of their software is off of their own hardware? Do you think that's where we're
Uh,
at?
to some extent, yeah, I do think that there is a lot of untapped potential that the future isn't on their hardware. Their future's at their theme parks and on the big screen and in TV shows. But I think they've realized that, and I think they are capitalizing on that in other ways. And I think they see themselves as an entertainment company now and not a console maker, and they want to be more diverse. And I think this email probably comes from an era where that wasn't so apparent and that wasn't so clear. But in the last few years,
Yeah.
with the creation of Nintendo Pictures and the opening of the theme parks, That's become more clear. And I think that makes Nintendo even further away from Microsoft's reach than it was in 2020.
Yeah, I'm aligned. I think, I mean, I don't know that I fully agree with everything you're saying in terms of I think Nintendo still thinks of themselves as a video game company first, but I definitely think that you're right. Like, you're totally right that looking at all the diversification that they've been doing in the last, like Sierra said, the theme park, right? Like you said, the movies, like those are things that are like they made $1 billion movie last year, and they're probably going to make 10, 15 more of those things over the next decade, right? And like I guarantee several of them will probably bring in a ton of money, and they must see the value in leveraging their IP in all these different ways and making something like Mario more than just a video game, right? Because it can be so much more. And I think they see that, you know. And I think you're right, where it's like, Phil made the comment about them sitting on this mound of cash. If the Switch 2 comes out and it's a success and they're able to pass the torch effectively and it's not a slowdown the way that some of their other console trade-offs have been, they're in a really powerful position because that stockpile of cash is only getting bigger because the Switch was an enormous success. The last several big games that they've put out have been enormous successes, and all of the experimental things they've been doing to grow their IP, so far so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that mound of cash, I think, is an important thing in being their war chest against a hostile takeover, because they can do share buybacks with that cash, and they can purchase those shares of other people to get more on their side to eliminate the possibility of a hostile takeover, whether that's from Value Act, whether that's from Microsoft, whether that's from that fund, right? I think it's a Saudi Arabian fund that is buying up all the shares in Nintendo.
Yeah, I think they
It
own like
does kind of
10% of
help
the
them.
company now or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, though. You're right. Like they have the capital to buy that stock back easily if they need to. So yeah, I mean, I think really the only reason that they were being aggressive about selling stock was probably to bring in the money that they needed to get the theme park off the ground, to get the movies off the ground. And now that those things have happened and they're successful and they're making money, maybe they have that flexibility again.
Yeah, in terms of brand, like, Nintendo's untouchable at the moment, and I guess that's something that Microsoft just couldn't forecast back then when these emails were written. So, I mean, like, I just can't even see the merger making sense from, like, a marketing perspective.
No, no, I think if
Or the
anything, like
acquisition, sorry.
No, they word it as a merger. So
Oh,
they
okay.
say
I did
a
read that right,
mutually
okay.
yeah,
agreeable merger of Nintendo and Microsoft.
they probably would have. Yeah, they
Uh,
probably would call the company Xbox Nintendo or Nintendo Xbox or something, right? Like you'd want to keep that brand name, I would
Ugh.
imagine. Which is yeah, it's weird, it's gross to think about, right? Um, yeah, no, I think you're right, Sierra. I think what has proven true about the video game industry more than anything is that IP is the name of the game. The most valuable thing you can own is IP. And Nintendo owns the most valuable IP in the industry, and their brand itself is that strong, right? Like, um, as good as PlayStation and Xbox are at their respective things, and they have their fanboys and yada yada, like the strength of the Nintendo brand is pretty unmatchable, I think. And like it makes sense that other people want a piece of it. But I think if anything, you're going to see Nintendo buy companies, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we move on from this email, I do want to ask you both, do you think this stuff coming out and being leaked in this way, do you think this harms relationships between Microsoft and Nintendo? Phil spoke about in the email that, they are one of the only US companies that would have a chance with Nintendo. Do you think that this kind of hurts them and makes it seem like they are trying to kind of butter them up to buy them in the future?
I don't want to speak too soon, but I would say I think it is bad for them because because Nintendo famously a pretty secretive company, right? Japanese companies tend to hold things closer to their chest than Western companies in general, but Nintendo notoriously tight-lipped. One thing I do know is that there was a point where Nintendo was working with Netflix to develop a Star Fox show that was going to be a puppet-based like Star Fox program that was going to be influenced by the style of short that they made for E3 2015, whatever it was. Who knows? But around the time of the last Star Fox game. And literally, the only reason that that project does not exist and never came to fruition was because it leaked. And Nintendo decided that because Netflix had leaked this information, or that somebody at Netflix had leaked this information, that they were a company they could not trust to work with them on their IP as a partner. So, like, grain of salt, that was a long time ago. Some of that leadership isn't present anymore. Like, modern Nintendo does make certain moves that Nintendo from 10 years ago I don't think would make. So, who knows, right? Maybe the value of working with Xbox outweighs, whatever slight or whatever they would interpret this as. But I wouldn't be surprised if this rubbed them the wrong way and if it does make them think like, okay, well, maybe we're going to keep you at a bit more of an arm's length than we were before.
Yeah, this email alone like oozes arrogance from Phil Spencer. Like this would rub me the wrong way if I was working at Nintendo. Even if like the talks like, like didn't exist or like were amicable, I don't know. Even if things were much more friendly back then, I just seeing this now, I'd be like, definitely leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Right?
It
It's
leaves a
like,
bad
oh,
taste
you
in my mouth, just like not having anything to do with the situation.
it's like you think you're going to buy us? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or really just like, I think the arrogance of your hardware is inferior, it's crappy, you should be coming over to our hardware. We're the
Interesting,
people
because
that
ours
know how to
outsells
make
yours
it.
2-1. So
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, the
That's
average
an
consumer does not fucking care about how high powered the hardware is.
It's like, is the future of your company on your hardware Xbox? I think that's a better question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, let's jump into this Switch 2 conversation because we got a lot to get into, and I want to make sure we get to it all because there have been rumors the last couple of weeks circling, right, that Nintendo showed off new hardware, the Switch successor, Switch 2, at Gamescom a few weeks ago, and this story's ebbed and flowed a little bit. We talked about it right as it was breaking back a couple of weeks back because we had Chris Brandrick, friend of the show from Switch Weekly, and Overkill. He was on the show. He had been at Gamescom, and it was like, I haven't talked to anybody that saw it. I didn't hear anything. Like, who knows? Of course, now we've gotten quite a bit more detail and more that I think cements the idea that there's some truth here. And we're getting information that we can maybe not take to the bank, but that I think is increasingly making the picture of what this console looks like clearer and clearer in a way that I think is worth tugging on. So, like with any rumor, take these things with a grain of salt, but I think what we know so far paints a pretty interesting picture. So let's get into it. So Tom Phillips of Eurogamer, of course, trusted source, he put out a piece back on September 7th that was kind of trying to separate some of the fact from fiction when it comes to this rumor and what we ended up learning from it, actually. So we had those presentations, right, behind closed doors at Gamescom. Eurogamer was able to confirm that that was the case. And there were 2 demos that were supposedly shown. One of which is a kind of like, beefed up version of Breath of the Wild, right? It was running at higher frame rate, and it was supposedly running at 40K, 60 FPS with DLSS, which we'll talk about DLSS a little bit more in a minute. So if you don't recognize that term, don't worry, we're gonna translate for you. But basically, we're looking at Breath of the Wild with much beefier tech specs as one of our 2 demos here. And that report like came following a report that we got a while ago from Jez Corden over at Windows Central that we had known that there was next generation conversations going on, right? And right after that report, we get a follow-up from Video Games Chronicle. Andy Robinson over there, another trusted source, posted about this and was able to confirm that the other demo that was apparently shown was the Matrix Awakens Unreal Engine 5 tech demo from Epic, which was originally released, I want to say, I think it was 2021, and that was one of the first like demos that was shown off of Unreal 5. It was shown to kind of be a benchmark for what was capable with the power of the Xbox Series X and the PS5, and of course, Unreal Engine 5. So that obviously is pretty interesting because it does give us a good idea of like what the benchmark is, right? Like if it's able to play something that's been shown off on this next gen hardware, that does speak to a pretty big jump in power. And we got a bit of context on kind of what's going on behind the scenes to make this run. That it's has less to do with the Switch 2's raw power and more to do with some technology that Nintendo's been developing that we've learned a little bit about here and there, but now it's all starting to come together and kind of paint a picture of how these different things will work together to bring the experience that we should expect on Switch 2, right? So the demo, and this is the Matrix demo, is supposedly using NVIDIA's DLSS, which again, right? Steve, what does that stand for?
Deep learning super sampling.
Thank you, Steve. So deep learning super sampling is upscaling technology, essentially, right? To boil it down, it is uh, basically you're able to get higher quality images out of lower quality hardware is
Yeah.
the most simplified way to explain what DLSS does.
So essentially, what it will do is it will render the game, say at 720p internally, but the output from the game will look like a 4K image or a 1080p image, and it will use neural networks and deep learning in order to do that. Basically, it's been trained, it's had a look at all of the like millions of images previously, and it says, okay, what do I need to do in order to reconstruct this image to make it look as high quality as possible?
And this is interesting because this technology is exclusive to NVIDIA's graphics cards. So both the PlayStation and Xbox actually use AMD. So that leads to an interesting I don't know if it's a question.
AMD has its competing technology with FSR.
Right.
So that's some I can't remember what the F is, but it's super resolution, FX super resolution, and it's basically not as good. It works on any graphics card, but it's not as good. It's not as good as Nvidia's technology.
Yeah, people generally agree that this is the superior technology. And if you want to take it from another gearhead, right? If Steve's word isn't good enough for you, Digital Foundry has said that with DLSS at any normal screen distance looks quote unquote almost as good as the real thing. So the difference between what you're seeing with upscaled DLSS and a true 4K 60 FPS image in the case of this Breath of the Wild demo, to the layman, you're not going to notice the difference. So that's huge, right? That means that taking advantage of this technology, theoretically, a Nintendo Switch 2 can potentially put out way stronger, higher quality images without breaking the bank on hardware and making it a ton more expensive, right? So that's potentially what we're looking at here. And this ties back to an AI upscaling patent that Nintendo filed back in 2020, and it does point to something that like sounds exactly like what we're talking about, right? So these patents were originally made public back in 2021, but not a ton of conversation about them at the time because I think the context of them was not yet clear, right? But now what we're looking at is the patent describes a process where a game can run at one resolution while a device is being powered by a battery, but when plugged into a power socket or connected to a TV, the output can be upscaled to 1080p. So what you're talking about there is very similar to how the Switch works right now, right? You have one configuration when you're in handheld mode, and when you plug it into the dock, it goes to a different configuration. But what we're talking about here, it is the upscaling of it all, which is not currently what the Switch does. We've talked about that, right? About the idea of, oh, could we see a successor to the Switch where when you put it in the dock, it upscales, it gets a higher resolution out of you get more performance out of the device when it's plugged into that. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, right? Like there's a diagram in that patent that shows a 540p image being upscaled to a 1080p one. And it does mention that other upscaling processes, including upscaling to 4K, would be possible. So that potentially confirms the idea that what we saw on that Breath of the Wild demo is simply an upscaled, maybe even a low res image, right?
I wonder why they felt the need to file their own patent for this, because seemingly from what we've heard, the demos were using DLSS, which is NVIDIA's technology that they've patented through the rafters. The patent that we've seen seems to be their own system, systems and methods for learned image conversion using an activation matrix going through a neural network and then getting a high resolution out of the other side. Or is the patent the fact that it doesn't do this on battery, but then when you plug it into power, it automatically activates that? Is that the innovation that they're doing here?
That's my interpretation of it, is that it's not the technology, it's the activation of the technology and the application of the technology. And that what I guess you're looking at here is that if they patent this, somebody couldn't take an NVIDIA, device and implement this the exact same way and basically, emulate what the Switch 2 is doing on another device.
Well, or seemingly have, say, a Steam Deck where it doesn't run FSR on handheld, but when I plug it into my TV in the dock, there's like a setting that automatically flicks that on. It would need to then be a manual activation process, which would just be annoying. The fact that this one thing is like an automatic switch because it detects that it's plugged in. I also wonder if this is just one of those things where they're just like, oh, we had this idea, let's patent this, and we're not going to use it, because I think it would be a real shame for DLSS to only be utilized when it's being plugged into the TV and when it's on power. It seems like that would be a really good thing to have on handheld as well, especially considering, you know, we've seen games that run better docked than on handheld already. Handheld is where sometimes games struggle, and I would want to have the very best experience on both handheld and docked, and I think DLSS will enable them to provide that.
I guess one doesn't preclude the other, though, right? Like, this system existing doesn't mean that they couldn't be using it in handheld. It's just more that when it's plugged in, it can take advantage of this upscaling technology.
Yeah, but I guess it's going to up is whether it's upscaling to the internal screen resolution. Maybe they're always natively outputting to that internal screen. I don't know.
That's I guess the question, right? Is like, is it natively 540, and when you're in handheld, it's outputting at 720, but then when you plug it in, it outputs at 1080, or or you know what I mean? Like, is it
Yeah,
that kind of thing where some level of upscaling's always going on, but the application of it is dependent on how you're using it at that time?
yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting. We'll find out if this is even a thing they utilize. I know that was one of the rumors. There's that the original Switch dock might have some kind of eGPU or
Yeah.
something built in, which I don't think they're ever going to go down that route. It seems like it's going to be
So
too expensive.
table that for a second, because there's a couple other details here that I think are worth pointing out. So there was another person who reported on the same story with their own sources, and it was Universo Nintendo editor in chief Necro Felipe. And per his sources, he was able to say that the version of DLSS shown running on the new Nintendo hardware was DLSS 3.1 and not DLSS 3.5, and mentioned that ray tracing is possible on Nintendo Switch 2, and that the retail version will come with 12 gigabytes of RAM. So those are some claims we have right now. Obviously, take them with a grain of salt, but it does speak to a very different power profile than what we're used to right now.
That's
And
a
then
huge jump in
yeah,
RAM alone. That's like 3 times what the
the
Switch
current
has got
model has
I
currently.
was
It's
gonna
got
3,
4
doesn't
ask.
it?
gig.
Yeah.
4.
4 gig. But that's shared between video RAM, I believe, and also just standard RAM that the
Yeah,
CPU can utilize. So 12 gigs is a chunky thing. I think that's what the Series X has.
yeah. Check that out.
Uh, Series X has 16 gigabytes of RAM.
That's pretty good.
Um, so you're getting close up to what it is. Of course, it might be DDR5 instead of DDR6. It might be slower RAM. It might be all sorts of stuff. Just because of it's got to run on battery, it might not be as performative. But even still, 12 gigs is a massive step up. And the fact that we're even discussing ray tracing on a handheld when we're really yet to see that in very many games on the big consoles, the Series X and the PlayStation 5. Like, there's always a question as to, is it going to support ray tracing? Do I have to give up quality mode in order to get ray tracing in there? I think most people are just like,
I mean,
whatever.
I think part of it speaks to the fact that, like, by all accounts, NVIDIA handles it better.
Oh yeah, the Nvidia's chips can handle ray tracing way better than AMD stuff.
And I think it shows that Nintendo's partnership with them is really paying off. You know, that like that
100%.
very mutually beneficial. And this is again grain of salt, but one of the folks who's talked about this story and has been, involved in the leaks and the reporting is the leaker Nate the Hate, right? We talked about him on the show last week. He also added context that the ray tracing that was shown off in the Matrix demo was quote unquote identical, if not better, than the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. So,
Which is to be
interesting.
expected. So if is it the Matrix Awakens demo that he was
Yes.
specifically talking about? So I believe in Unreal Engine 5 in that demo, all of that ray tracing was done in software and not hardware accelerated through the chip. I might be wrong, but I believe Lumen, which is Unreal Engine 5's lighting technology. There's Lumen and Nanite, the two big new technologies and innovations in Unreal Engine 5. Lumen was very much software based, and I would imagine that they've now hardware accelerated that. Fortnite runs on Unreal Engine 5 that uses Lumen. I believe that that's hardware accelerated now, but this was a very early demo.
I mean, I just think like the idea that we're seeing something that is that has parity with those devices is impressive, right? Like that's worthwhile context, but I don't think anyone's expecting the Nintendo Switch 2 to be anywhere near those devices in terms of
I wasn't
power.
expecting ray tracing to be even discussed. Like,
Right.
it never even entered my mind. I was like, oh, this is just going to be a slightly more powerful Nintendo Switch, and if it can run the games that at the same frame rate, but it looks nicer, then great.
So
Because
I
it's
mean,
not even gonna have an OLED screen, right? It's gonna be like a regular.
it won't have an OLED at launch,
Yeah, it
right?
won't even have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they said it was. I feel like we had that somewhere. LCD, yeah, said to have an LCD screen, and we'll still have cartridge slots. That was like the last update we had on the
right.
hardware specs.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm interested to hear what you think about that, Sierra. Like you seem to react to that level of power. Like, is that a big surprise for you? Like, where were you thinking it was going to sit in terms of benchmarks? Like, is that something you're excited to hear?
I don't know. I wanted handheld to be like 10. Is it currently a 1080? Like whatever it's
The
currently at
current one's
now.
720.
Yeah.
720, yeah.
So I was hoping baseline of 1080, like run 60 frames and like more capacity. OLED with like the stock like basic Switch 2 model. Those are my expectations or what I ideally would have liked to see for like a base model. Unless they're gonna do like a Switch 2 Pro and then they're gonna introduce those things. Like I could
Probably, at least for the OLED, I would imagine that'll be the case. Like, we'll
yeah,
probably get an OLED one later again.
right, because they were like, that worked for the regular Switch. Let's do it
Yeah,
again.
right. And it
So
keeps like the sticker shock down when you initially put it out, because it's like
yeah.
OLED screens are obviously not cheap.
The RAM
Well, they
amount
must have
is
some of
shocking
the
too,
same
but
panels lying around, though, right? Like,
right.
Yeah,
I
but I mean,
personally think a 720p panel is absolutely fine and adequate for a handheld. And I don't think we really need a screen higher resolution than that. I've not once had any issue with looking at a 720p screen on the Switch, and I've had no issue running games at 720p on my Steam Deck. I don't know about you two.
I don't know that I would say I've had issues, but I think like I am inclined to agree where like I I think it would be a shame to have a device that's capable of more and like still feeling like it's, being limited in that way a little bit. Cause
That's where
like
I'm at.
I'm not gonna sit here and say that like the 720 handheld on my like OLED Switch looks bad, but like I noticed the difference between it and my phone screen, and like I wouldn't mind something that felt more modern in that way. And I feel like I'm not looking at displays in 720 anymore, and like
Right.
I I don't know. I could kind of go either way on it. Like if they tell me it's 720 and like the base performance is so much stronger and like I'm not dealing with like this the kind of experience I had with like Xenoblade 3 where like that game can't hit 720 so it's in 540 like if it was like all right like with the power of this thing we can guarantee that everything's going to be 720 60 that feels better to me than if it's 1080 30 right but like I don't know it's
Yeah.
it's not an argument I feel super convinced on when people tell me that it's not worth it.
I think the trade-off with battery is the biggest thing for me. Driving that
Sure.
many pixels is
Yeah.
tough, and maybe with the NVIDIA chips and DLSS and all of that stuff, they are able to kind of keep the power draw down. But I kind of feel like if you're going from an OLED screen to an LCD, LCD is already a bigger power draw. You've got to keep the backlight on all of the time. To then go up to 1080p, I think would only increase the power drain on the battery. And I
Mm.
don't really want to go back to like the launch Switch battery life or even worse. Like if we're looking at Steam Deck levels of battery life where I can only play Tears of the
Yeah.
Kingdom for an hour and a half, that's gonna be an issue and I don't want to go to that.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
also wonder
I'm with you there.
like how much of this, like, if it makes it to the final model, like these like specs is like them future proofing the Switch for like component shortages. Like maybe they're just kind of playing their cards this way so that like it'll be easier to mass produce like a slightly better quality product that like raises the bar a little bit, but not too much. Cause again, like uh, you know,
I I I
person who
think they're
buys this
looking at
shit is
this
just like a
as
family person. Uh,
I I think they're looking at it as a generational jump though, and I think they're trying here to show that they're not doing an iterative console again. We went from the GameCube to the Wii. That was very iterative. It was basically a GameCube with like some motion control slapped on top of it. We went from the Wii to the Wii U. People got confused. They thought that the messaging around that was it's an add-on for the Wii. Cool, I've got a tablet now for my Wii, and I don't really care about it. The Switch was a real hard break, and I think they see these consoles as having 7 to 8, maybe even 10-year lifespans. You've gotta put enough tech in there that's gonna take you through into the 2030, 2031, maybe even 2032. And that's a long time. So 12 gigs of RAM seems like a lot, and we're all like, "Oh, wow, that's like a crazy amount. It's almost as much as a Series X." But what happens when the PS6 and the next Xbox comes out in 2028, and we're like, and they've got 20 gigs of RAM or
See,
24 gigs of RAM,
I don't know
and
how
the
much I think that matters because like the Switch has 4 and it's still put out one of the best games of this year. Right? Like
Mhm.
Tears of the Kingdom for my money still the front runner for game of the year. And that's on extremely old hardware. That was old hardware when they made the Switch, right? So it's like 9-year-old hardware really, not 7. So like I think Sierra's probably right. The idea that like they probably are going to want to have something that's future proof, but also like I don't imagine it's going to be top of the line modern when it comes out. It's going to be, what can we get the next 2 Tears of the Kingdoms out of with this?
I
And
don't know.
like
I think this is gonna be I really think this is gonna be like bleeding edge, especially if it's got DLSS 3.1 in there at the demo. Presumably it's gonna have 3.5 in there. Maybe even by the time this launches, it's got DLSS 4. That DLSS 3 um, added in a bunch of stuff, right? It brought in the frame generation stuff that we spoke about on the Steam Deck podcast
sure.
for FSR3, where it can basically make up frames in between to fill in the
I
gap and
mean,
get you up to that 60 FPS.
it's like if what we're hearing from Necro though from Necro Philippe is right, like it's DLSS 3.1. Like that's not the cutting edge. That's not the hottest thing. It's like close enough, right? And like I think they've proven that they don't need to have a cutting edge device to make software that appeals to us, right? Like the Switch has, power parity with the PS3 more than
Mhm.
anything, right? And like that's 2 console generations back at this point. Um the idea that this is like, you know, more on par with like last gen, that's still pretty good. Like it doesn't need to necessarily do much more than that, I don't think. And like we do have another source here. This one comes from an article from The Verge, where Activision Blizzard was talking about how they were briefed about the Switch 2 last year. And there's a quote specifically here that's talking about the performance, and it does say that it will be, in the way that the Switch is comparable to the PS3, this is supposedly comparable to the PS4 and the Xbox One. They said, given the closer alignment to Gen 8 platforms in terms of performance and our previous offerings on PS4, Xbox One, it's reasonable to assume we could make something compelling for the NG Switch as well. It would be helpful to secure early access to development hardware. Blah, blah, blah. It's Activision talking about developing for it, right? But we have a specific mention of its benchmark being on par with those devices. And I mean, look at how good something like The Last of Us Part 2 looks, or Ghost of Tsushima, or something like that, right? Like, you can get really incredible, beautiful, powerful games
You
out of
can
that
make
hardware.
them look even better though, because you can run those games at 30 FPS or a lower resolution and use DLSS to fill in the gaps, right? Those
Right.
games on PS4 had to output at 900p, 1080p, 1440p, depending on what console you're running them on, PS4, PS4 Pro. You can output that at 540p and say, DLSS, work your magic, make this look like 1080p or make this look like 4K, and give it to me at running at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. And it seemingly can do it. It's pretty incredible. I think it's worth noting that I think they can upgrade DLSS with software. DLSS
Oh,
3.5, there's not a single game that
interesting.
utilizes it yet. Cyberpunk's update is out later this week. They announced today, actually, that it's the first game that's going to utilize DLSS 3.5. So 3.1 was used in a demo. It's very possible that 3.5 will be there at launch, or even the next iteration of DLSS.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because then it becomes a question of like, is the quality of it limited by software, not hardware?
Mm,
That would be crazy, right? To think that like the device could get more
yeah.
powerful like as the generation goes, be capable
Which
of
would be
more.
awesome. I would love that.
That'd be great, right? Talk about future proof.
Rare Nintendo moment.
We're like, actually, this is pretty cutting edge, like we didn't want it on purpose. We
I think the
backdored our way in there.
only other time that would have happened would have been with the expansion pack on the N64, where you put that in and you can actually
Oh,
Yeah.
play some chunkier games, gets a
yeah.
bit more powerful.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about now.
Wow.
This is the next gen version of that. So it's very interesting. I mean, this paints a pretty specific picture, which I appreciate. Like, this is the most concrete information we've gotten about the thing, and having like a benchmark of it's as powerful as a PS4. It has 12 gigs of RAM. It is taking advantage of this DLSS to potentially hit that 4K 60 benchmark that I think we were hoping for with this device, right? Um, it's exciting. It's a lot of exciting information, and it really does make you think about, what more they can unlock and what more they can figure out with this much more power under the hood, and like what that means for, like the overworld of the next Zelda game, or like what it means for like, the next Mario game, and how many like individual moons you could get on a map or things like that, right? Like, there's so much that goes into having that extra processing power, aside from just like the game looks better, the game runs smoother, right? Like, to me, that's one of the most exciting things about like the current gen consoles, is like having depth of world, and like having worlds feel more filled in, and having more random encounters, and having more you know not
I
making the
think that's
world
going to be a
bigger,
big
making the world
thing.
deeper.
Yeah. And making it feel more rich, because that is one thing with I think Tears of the Kingdom that I did notice was a lot of the world is just empty. There's not a lot there when you're out and about and you're walking around, and I like that. It gives you a sense of exploration, and I'm on my own. But I can't help but think how much cooler it would be if some of the areas were richer, had more people, had more characters, had more life in them. And I can imagine a lot of that is restricted by hardware as well as a creative choice.
Especially RAM. Like having the number of models you have on a screen at a given time without the game exploding is directly proportional to how much RAM you have to play with.
Yeah,
And like,
imagine what you could do with the Pokemon game where you could see like all of the different Pokemon on the screen.
yeah, or like a swarm of Pokemon could attack you, and it's like literally there's like 40 models on the screen or something like that, right? Like those are things that like become way, way more realistic as you're able to take advantage of these tech leaps. Look at the density of an open world game from the PS3 era versus the PS4 era, and like that's the jump we're looking at here, right? Like that's exciting. And like you think with Tears of the Kingdom, how much of that was creative choices because they knew that you could build like a mech and fly it into any space, right? Like
Yeah.
imagine you're in a town filled with people and then you bring your a million piece war machine that you built and fly it over and the game explodes. Like that's I think, what we're talking about being able to unlock and get away from, which is super exciting.
So the other demo that seemingly was shown at Gamescom was a 4K 60 version of Breath of the Wild with DLSS to get it there. Do you think that we see them re-release these games and charge for them? Or do you think the new console has a mode where they can put any game in it, like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, and it does that up-res like boost mode that I'm
Yeah.
thinking like the PS4 Pro used to have?
I hope so. Um, they did say that the intent of this was to be a demo and not that they didn't have plans to like re-release the game commercially in this form. So I don't know if they're saying that because they're like, hey, like, don't get your hopes up. This isn't a product, or because there's some kind of solution like you mentioned. But I mean, it's Nintendo, right? Like they're happy to charge you for the same game 30 times. I have a hard time imagining they're going to give you anything for free, but maybe that's like maybe that's how you sell the idea of this being a continuation of your Switch library is like, hey, like you already bought into the Switch ecosystem. If you buy the Switch 2, all your games are backwards compatible and they get upscale. Like that that could be a thing, and like that could be a way to try and encourage that existing market to adopt the shiny new toy, right? Of like, oh, look, you could, yeah, you're still playing Tears of the Kingdom. Great. Now you can play at 60 FPS. Wouldn't you want that? Like that does speak to a certain person.
Would that be enough for you to like buy in Sierra if all of a sudden Pokemon ran nicely and looked all right?
Oh god, yeah. I mean, come on, they got me. They've had me since birth. But I would be more of an evangelist for Nintendo, of a vocal evangelist if they could pull that off.
I think it does help sell the hardware. Like that was an argument I was making to all the naysayers when Steve and I bought our like
Yeah, I mean that had a lackluster launch lineup for the Series X and the PS5. Like there were a couple of good games, but it was the quality of life. It's like, yeah, but I can now run my games with like auto HDR and frame
yeah,
rate boost on the Series X, and
or like
they play
whatever
great.
whatever current gen game I was gonna play this fall anyway, I'm gonna shave off like fucking an hour every time I play it from not sitting at loading screens. Like that makes a difference. And I think
Yeah.
if there is a situation where you're like, oh, okay, there's one big launch game and I don't care about it, or I'm waiting for the fall, I'm waiting for this, I'm waiting for that. That could be the thing that pushes you over of like, yeah, but like
I was like,
you're
I'll
playing
give Breath of
Mario.
the Wild a go again. Why
Yeah,
not?
you're
You
Right.
playing
know?
Mario Kart. Don't you want to play it in 60 FPS, like 4K? Like it's cool, right? Like
I mean, like, for them to implement those changes and actually, like, upscale the hardware on, like, the Switch 2 in a meaningful way, like, it also communicates how they feel about the consumer and, like, what has been the notorious outlook everyone fucking memes about, like, Nintendo does not give a fuck.
yeah,
So
it
but
would
we
be
also
a
can't hold our
really
breath.
big PR win for sure. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And it's an easy talking point, right? When you're like, oh, like what, why do you want to upgrade? Why do you want to move over when your Switch is just fine? It's like, well, you got this.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not to mention, hey, there's this game that's coming out and it's exclusive, or hey, or you could play
Mhm.
Metroid Prime 4 on your old Switch, but it 4K 60 on your new Switch. I like that works. It just does, right? Like I do think I hope that they look at it that way. I hope that they're ready to like do something more conventional and just be like, it is called the Nintendo Switch 2. It is backwards compatible. Like, and sell it in that very simple, straightforward way, right? Because it clearly works. There's a reason that the PS5 has such strong. It's like, oh, you owned a 4, cool. Buy the 5. Oh, okay, great. It's a higher number. That's better. Immediately understandable.
I
Oh,
know, I've
all
never
my games
understood
come
that.
over with me. Okay, great. Immediately understand. Like, it just makes sense, you know?
Even phones do it. Like even phones. I know that the higher number iPhone that came out this year is newer than last year's iPhone.
14's bigger than 13. I understand that.
It's
Great.
it's cool. Just do that. I'm calling it the Switch NG from now on though, because I like that name. And it's we've got nothing better to call it. Switch Pro, Switch 2, new Switch, Super Switch. Like, what the hell are we gonna call this? If NG Switch is good enough for Bobby and Furukawa, I'm calling it the NG Switch.
No, called the NX. That was a cool code name. Bring it back.
NX was a really cool code.
Yeah.
name. It
NX is
really
gonna give it
was,
to you.
yeah.
Come on.
I mean, Revolution was a better name than the Wii as well. I still think
All the code
Nintendo
names are
Revolution
cool.
was way
Yeah.
better. I mean, Dolphin leaves a little bit to be decided, but
I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's not a bad name for a video game console. Because
They should name it like an energy drink. I'm trying to think of like ridiculous naming conventions. No, I'm not gonna. Never mind.
No, you gotta say it now. You gotta say it.
Like the Switch, but like when you make like energy drinks like alcoholic, but it's like hard seltzer, or, like
hard Switch.
energy.
Definitely the horniest name.
Switch on hard is the tagline.
No matter which way you play, switch hard.
We gotta go back to the way we were advertising games in the 90s, where we had like condoms by the bed with the Game Boy Advance.
Video game ads are not horny enough in 2023, okay? If I'm not deeply uncomfortable after watching the ad, how effective was it really? Anyway, we'll put a pin in the Switch 2 conversation there for right now. If you guys want to write in and let us know what you think about the hardware situation and all of these details that we got, or if you want to send in your own name for what we could call the Switch 2. Maybe you can
Please
top
do.
the hard Switch. I don't think you can. Wait, that actually you can't top the hard Switch because it's okay. Anyway, we're gonna talk more about
Someone's dad listens to the show.
Steve's dad listens to this show. I'm sorry, Andy. So, happy anniversary, by the way. So we're gonna talk more about
more than my mum's in the room when my dad's listening. Usually, that makes it even worse.
I appreciate all the support. Thank you, the Radfords. So we're gonna talk more about Nintendo hardware in just a second here. But let me remind you that this episode of Nintendo Noise is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of September. You all kept these mics hot and brought this incredible program to the folks at home.
They're
Thank you
very
so
hot
much.
today, apparently.
Yeah, very hot. We're too hot to handle today, and it's all thanks to you. Thank you so much, Arnold J. River, Christopher Valence, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Asselmeyer, aka Asobi, Snack and Go, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Y'all are the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of all the hot nonsense we do here at Flip Screen Games. Remember, if you want to go and show your support just like they did, if you want to go above and beyond just like they did and help keep these mics and lights hot, get the show early, get a bunch of perks and goodies, you can find our Patreon, our Discord, our email address, and so much more over at flipscreen.games. Again, that's our website. Go over there, click on some stuff. However you choose to get involved, it helps us out a ton, and it won't cost you a pretty penny unless you want to go above and beyond to show your support over on Patreon. However you choose to, thank you. We're back. We're doing more stuff. Whew. That was it. We got through it. We got through the plugs, gang. Tough plugs.
Are we losing you again?
I'm lost.
Come back. Come back.
All right. Reel me back in. Okay. So, Switch 2. The Nintendo Switch console, not the only thing getting a refresh if this patent is to be believed, because Nintendo has, of course, filed a patent that suggests they are working on a brand new Joy-Con that will take advantage of the Hall effect style joysticks that we know from the folks over at GillyKit. So if you're not familiar, if you're a longtime listener, you should be familiar with GillyKit. Steve's talked about them a lot. They are a independent, hardware developer that created these magnetic style Hall effect joysticks. The TLDR is that if you use a regular joystick, right, on your standard Joy-Con or any other controller that experiences drift, there are sensors that touch, right? Like whenever you move the joystick, the butt of it kind of like swings and hits the sensor, and that's how the controller knows which way you're moving is from those contacts. Of course, the more that you use your controller, the more that will get worn away, and the connection between those two devices that are supposed to touch gets worn down, and then that leads to drift, right? Because it's not matching up right. It's activating the sensor at times when it shouldn't be, and that leads to your character just like wandering around, right? Because it's not getting a proper input. The benefit of the Hall effect sticks is that they take advantage of magnets, basically. So instead of it being two physical pieces of hardware that are rubbing and wearing down, it's a magnetic field that triggers it. And this effectively eliminates drift. It's not impossible for drift to happen with a Hall effect stick, but it is so
Not for the same reason.
significantly, yeah, and it's so significantly reduced that it may as well address the issue, more or less. So what we're looking at is, essentially, hopefully, on the Switch 2, we should have solved Joy-Con drift with this technology. Is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, seemingly. I mean, this uses what they call a magnetoheological fluid whose
Great.
viscosity changes in accordance with an intensity of a magnetic field and which serves as a resistance when the operation element is displaced. And I think they've had to work around the fact that GillyKit owns the patent on the sticks that everyone else uses, and they probably don't want to pay GillyKit for those sticks and for that patent. And so they've come up with their own solution, which uses a fluid, a liquid. So I don't know how this works. I'm not smart enough. If you are interested, you can go look it up at the United States Patent Office. But good news is your next Joy-Cons on the Switch 2 should not drift. If it even comes out with those.
They might leak,
they may not.
They might leak magneto fluid, though, of some kind, which I'm a little concerned about, but seems like I guess it solves the problem.
Every Nintendo Switch comes with a fun little beverage. You just grab the Joy-Con.
They gotta put whatever that additive they put on the cart so that kids wouldn't eat them. Like they have to
don't drink your Joy-Cons.
do not drink the Joy-Con fluid, everybody.
Is it the new Tide Pod challenge? You just have to pop open the magnetic fluid.
Crack your Joy-Cons open, kids. There's a fun beverage inside.
My mind immediately went to like a Matrix situation where you get the miscolored Joy-Cons and it's like, you want the blue Joy-Con fluid or the red Joy-Con fluid? I'm not sure which one is which, but we're going to find out.
This is great news. But do you think Nintendo even talks about it? Do you think they ever say these aren't gonna drift?
No.
They're
way.
Probably like really conservative old dudes that don't take accountability. I don't know.
Like we can't acknowledge the extremely huge black eye that we've been ignoring this entire generation.
Yeah, right.
They're like, yeah, we already paid to fix them. Shut up and get over it. Buy the new one. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they acknowledge it. I think they're just going to be like, with our new, like they'll talk about it, but they won't talk about why it's relevant or that it's like, going to address this problem. I don't think.
Imagine they still have to allow, there's still a problem and people still have to send their Joy-Cons in to get repaired as a service by Nintendo.
I wouldn't hold out. That might happen. I feel like if there's anything wrong with them, they're gonna have to do that because people are gonna be like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Again?
Yeah.
I bought another set of these.
Again?
Now they're $90 with inflation."
I'm reading more into this fluid, and it seems fucking cool
and delicious.
Apparently, the patent says that you may be able to change the viscosity of the fluid so that the user can feel greater resistance force in some instances.
Like with hardware, you can do that.
Apparently, you
So can
can.
you
They
use it?
can. Sorry.
What the? So you could use it like a DualSense?
Yeah, I guess so. Like you can. It's the sticks themselves, right? So you'll be able to tighten them up or
Whoa,
make them looser.
that's
Maybe you could make
cool.
it so you couldn't like push forwards and pull back.
Yeah. Whoa, that's interesting. That could be
So
really
this
cool.
this fluid's really cool. I'm into the fluid now. The magnetor heological
Magneto
fluid.
fluid, right? I got it.
Yeah.
I've seen the
Magneto.
X-Men movies. So, it's why they put him in the plastic box, because if he's too close to another person, he could pull all the iron out of their blood. So you got to watch out for that.
What, and plastic stops the magnetic
Well,
field?
he
Is that
can only control metal. So he's into plastic, then he's in a plastic box. He can't get out.
but I'm fairly sure magnets work through metal if they're strong enough.
Not if it's really thick plastic.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're
It's-
gonna have
it's-
to have a science project episode where we test this.
Military grade plastic.
We need Mythbusters Magneto edition where we get like a big a plastic box and we put one of these new Joy-Cons inside and we can see if we can like suck the liquid out of the giant magnet.
See if the Joy-Con can kill you from the other side of the glass. All right, so we're gonna close this show out with one more little story that I want to touch on for y'all. So we have the second $70 Nintendo Switch game, and it is Mortal Kombat 1, and it's getting a little controversial. Again, it's got some heat today because people are not super stoked with the quality of the game on Switch, and asking for $70 for this game is rubbing some people the wrong way.
When I read this, I thought by Mortal Kombat 1, it was the original game from 1992 that they were trying to charge $70 from. But I realize now, because I've seen this at some of Jeff's events, that that's not the case. They've just rebooted it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like, it is the first in a new series of a new Mortal Kombat like you've never seen before.
Yeah, they're doing like a soft timeline thing where it's like, okay, the timeline got reset at the end of the last game, and now, the guy who used to be like the main guy, he's become like a god, and the guy who used to be the main god, he's like the young guy. It's just like Sub-Zero and Scorpion have always been enemies, now they're brothers. So it's like a little Ultimate Universe refresh kind of thing. We're shaking the pieces up. But
I'm
They're-
watching some of the videos
I
that
was
were
saying,
posted in that
you see this
article.
video? You seen this game video?
Why
that-
are they just walking on different they're like walking past each other? Like, what is going on?
It's Bacon Sore of Astora is the Twitter user who posted this video that I was just sharing, and it's not good. It's not good. So there's I guess it's a syncing issue where like the characters are getting knocked out of the plane that they're supposed to be on, and like he was basically walking into the back of the level, which is where I forget, there's like a new gimmick in this game where you can like have a character back you up, and like you can tag them in to like do an attack, and I'm guessing that that's where they're supposed to be, and they jump out from there to do their attack, and for whatever reason he's like clipping through and going back into it. And it's like there's just like a lot of like weird stuff that people have been talking about within like the first couple hours of testing it, where it's just like it's got a lot of problems. There's like issues of like characters getting like stuck in a part of the level. There's issues of people saying that like hair or fabric will get stuck and then the model will keep moving. There's been issues where like characters will like stretch across the screen while they're trying to like rubber band to where they're supposed to be. There's like high latency problems with like the menus. There's issues with like it taking several seconds to switch between characters, which is again a thing that's supposed to be like a button press. There's a whole tutorial It's called the fifth positioning tutorial. Again, I'm not totally sure on what's going on there yet, so context is escaping me there. I'm imagining that's one of the game modes. It's impossible to complete right now because of bugs that are like very, very glaring. They say it is. This is from Twisted Voxel, their report saying it's impossible to complete due to glaring bugs. Does not bode well.
It's also completely missing a mode, apparently. This invasions mode is not there. And the Switch players have to wait for the whole season 1 content in a matter of weeks.
Oh,
Like,
and then
what?
here's the cameo. Cameo is the name of the feature that I was talking about where you summon the
Yeah.
other character. Apparently, that the frame rate drops every time you do that. And it's one of the core
Jesus.
mechanics of the game.
That
That
is
would be
so
like
bad.
it would be like it's like every time you did
Wow.
a smash attack, the game dropped frames.
I think it was Mango that posted a screenshot on the Discord as well,
Uh-huh.
where there's just no facial expressions. They don't load. And it was so weird, like, looking at it, and I was just like, "Oh my god." I had no idea how much of a mess this was. I also didn't realize it was the second $70 game on the Switch. Like, this is a great example of why I don't pre-order video games anymore. I wait for a review and I wait to see how it runs before I buy it. Unless I'm 100% sure, like something like Tears of the Kingdom is gonna be a great game. There's no way I pre-order them anymore.
Especially with stuff like this. Like I certainly do not mean to insinuate that anybody who bought this game and is now dealing with the problems like it's their fault, but like I wouldn't expect this game to run on the Switch, right? So like when you see it, oh, it's $70 and it's coming out, it must be fine. It must be one of those games that they figured out, right? And it's like, no. And
You know,
it's
the only
kind of
thing
wild that they're putting it out in this state because it's just a black eye for no reason, you know?
Yeah, I don't get it. Why I don't know why you would not just delay it. Like, if you think you can get the Switch version done, just release it at a later date so they have a
Release it next year on
players
the
have a
next
good
hardware. Like,
experience.
what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Yeah.
What
Nuts.
we really needed was Phil Spencer to buy Warner Brothers games and then butter up Nintendo with his relationship because he's the Microsoft's the only one that could get close to Nintendo.
The only
And then
American
maybe they'd
company.
have a good experience.
Clearly, what we need to fix this is
Oh.
Xbox to own Nintendo. Yes, thank you.
That was
Steve.
such a beautiful way to bring it full circle, Steve.
You know what, gang? I think we did good work today. I think this is an
Agreed.
A S rank episode. Everybody, high fives all
High
around.
fives.
Great. So yeah, don't buy this game on Switch. Buy it on any other platform. That's our PSA for you today.
Yeah, maybe buy the Switch too.
Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe.
Maybe if it runs on
We'll
Switch too.
see.
I'll tell you what. Didn't realize this game came out today. Thought this was still a couple of weeks away. Very much hoping I get the time to play it. I love Mortal
You
Kombat.
won't. I don't think you are.
So drowning. I'm drowning in games, Steve. I don't have time. I'm out there exploring the deepest black, in Starfield.
Are you gonna play this one, Sierra? Was Mortal Kombat on your list? I know you're a fighting
No,
game
Smash
person.
only. I only
Okay.
play. That's the only fighting game I play. I do like Mortal Kombat. I mean, like I like it. Like shout out to Mortal Kombat. I just won't buy. I just buy money. I won't pay money for it.
I'll play some Mortal Kombat. Yeah, Mortal Kombat is my favorite fighting game because I'm not good at it, but it has a good story. So there's something there.
Mm.
And I always liked playing it with my friends that also sucked.
And the
that
death
was
is
fun.
funny.
Yeah. It's just a good time.
The playing with friends who also suck as well. I liked Tekken. I played so much Tekken 3 on the PlayStation 1.
I was such a big Tekken
Loved
kid
that
back
game.
in the day. Tekken 2, Tekken Tag. Great games.
Oh, so good.
See, fighting games are fun until people try to get sweaty about them. That's where I'm like, look,
I can play with people
I'm
who are
not
good
good.
at the game.
I'm
Yeah, I
not
can.
good. I can't get
No.
better. I've tried. I'm too old now, too. 30 years old. I can't. If I didn't have the chops when I was young, I'm not getting them now, Sierra's rolling eyes like
I was
maybe
gonna
it's gotta
say
get
never
good.
too late.
See, I don't know. I think you just had the raw skill, and
Fuck.
like you honed it.
To slingshot as a secretary dog. Oh yes.
Yo, I've seen you pull off some cool shit. All right,
Thanks.
look, let's not undersell our abilities here.
True. You're right.
All right, so that's your PSA for the day. Switch 2's coming. Don't buy Mortal Kombat 1 on Switch. Get it somewhere else. And make sure you're right in for next week's show, because I got a feeling it's going to be a slow news week after these last two, right? Surely things must slow down now, right?
Yeah.
For a week or two, and then new games come out. Oh my God. Anyway, make sure you write in. Let us know what you're excited for the rest of the year. What are your thoughts on this report here today about the Switch 2? What are your thoughts on Xbox acquiring Nintendo? If you want to write in about any of that or anything else we've discussed on this or any other episode of the show, make sure you hit us up, questions@flipscreen.games. Make sure you join the Discord where the conversation keeps rolling between episodes. Make sure you head over to flipscreen.games and click on something. Whatever you click on, it helps us out a lot. So go click on some stuff. You know how to do the internet. Anyway, for the crew, I've been Pete. She's been Sierra. He's been Steve. Nope, he's been Steve. We'll see you next week for another episode of Nintendo Noise, baby. Bye.